First of all, before we begin, I want to thank Square Enix for the opportunity to cover Final Fantasy XVI on PC. They have given me a free code to download, and this is one of my first codes I have ever received from a big company like Square Enix. This is an honor and privilege to experience this, especially as someone who grew up playing their titles. For this little review, I will not be going into full detail on the entirety of the game, and the focus will be on user experience. I've spoken about FF16 plenty of times on this channel, and I don't necessarily need to explain many of the things I critiqued about. Also, I did not go very far in the game yet because it does take a while, more so nearly the whole game, to obtain many of the movesets, so my apologies if the gameplay doesn't seem like a lot, and I was getting back into the groove of things. Now, let's get on with the video. If you are new to FF16 and Final Fantasy as a whole, and were wondering if you would need to get into the other games to understand this, fortunately, the answer is no. Every numbered Final Fantasy game is completely different from the rest. Look at each numbered title as a book full of different tales told to a person, which is why different Final Fantasy games resonate with many different people. We all had our first experience somewhere, and FF16 does the same like the previous games by giving a newcomer an epic fantasy experience. Final Fantasy XVI is an action RPG and is the first game that primarily focuses the gameplay on real-time combat, which is inspired by the Devil May Cry series. Square Enix themselves had recruited Ryota Zuzuki, who is DMC5's combat designer, to help develop and lead Final Fantasy XVI's combat. The combat really showcases the gameplay traits you may be familiar with if you have played Devil May Cry before, which was their intended direction to create this Final Fantasy game differently from the rest. The purpose of this game, which was said by Yoshi P, the producer of FF16, is to reach a whole new generation of gamers, and wanted 16 to become a must-buy status since he believes that Final Fantasy has been fossilized in the minds of players. This direction was a big risk considering that their audience are turn-based players, and before the game officially launched, this was one of the biggest discussions amongst fans of where the series is heading to. I believe that this is a healthy change of direction for the franchise considering how every mainline Final Fantasy has involved itself with the turn-based genre. It doesn't hurt at all to try something new for once, and this can be one of the biggest blueprints to have for Square Enix since they can expand more with this combat system in future titles. Although it was said that FF16 is an action RPG, I believe it also plays as a character action game with the amount of flashy and technical combos you can do throughout the game. Again, very similar to DMC's gameplay, so the game can be a bit punishing if you don't know how to do certain combos, but there are plenty of ways to learn the game with its side content, with the training room or the arcade mode, which allows you to replay levels you experience in the main story. Also, there is an accessibility feature allowing you to auto combo, so if you just want to enjoy the game without learning the certain mechanics, it's available, or you could use that feature to see how your character can combo and you could try to imitate that. The developers wanted everyone to enjoy the game, so if you feel a bit intimidated by it, don't be, since there are ways to learn or go through the game and enjoy it without any punishments. With the story, I'm not going to say as much due to how very story driven the game really is. All I can say is that FF16 offers a darker, more mature story within this beloved franchise, and I'm not necessarily saying this is the first Final Fantasy game that gives these themes, because you can argue previous titles have done so. It's just that Final Fantasy XVI is very clear cut that this is really a mature game with a very serious story behind it. I enjoyed going through the story in my first playthrough, but I do want to note that this game does have its highs and lows due to the pacing of the story and how fast-paced the action, the gameplay can be. I would say that you would need to be in a mood for consuming its story when playing this game, since the majority of the time you will be sitting down and seeing how the story unfolds in each part of the game, whether you are in side quests or main story scenarios. Now, with the biggest question of them all, how does it run on PC? As I said before, I'll talk about the performance of a user's experience. Don't expect some Digital Foundry analysis. This is just some guy who loves playing Final Fantasy games, and I had 2 playthroughs for F16 that consume a lot of hours along with their DLC expansion, so I am very in tune with how the performance runs on console, which wasn't the greatest. When Final Fantasy 16 was announced for PC, I was always curious how the graphic fidelity would be in this game without running on a dynamic resolution. The PS5 build had it in order to give decent performance because the game was very demanding of the PS5's power. Although the dynamic resolution downscaled to 720p when in battles, I honestly did not notice it, which is why I continued to play the game in performance mode. I could tell throughout my playthrough that the PS5 build never gave a crisp and sharp look to the resolution, but the game still held its own and it looked beautiful all the way through. What just bothered me was the unstable frame rate you would go through outside of combat. The amount of stutters while exploring was very damaging to the player and towards the game, especially how these areas have so much eye candy to them. With the PC playthrough, I decided to change up the settings on certain parts of the game just to see how it would perform. The PC build I currently have had a NVIDIA 4070 Super GPU with an AMD Ryzen 7900X CPU, so I had a bit of a higher expectation when I initially ran this game for the first time. The settings I ran the game on is the use of NVIDIA's super resolution without frame generation since I needed my hardware acceleration enabled, but later on, I did try it out, which will be discussed later. I also checked out settings without any upscaling features or no use of NVIDIA or AMD's AI, and VRS was not turned on. There was honestly no big difference with VRS, so I ended up ignoring that option. From what I experienced with NVIDIA's super resolution on without frame generation, I got about 40 to 80 frames per second, and without the use of upscaling features, the game runs the same. I did not see any big performance leaps or visual changes when using both of these settings, so it's up to your preference if you want to use these certain features. I do want to also bring up that although averaging 50 to 60 FPS on ultra settings is okay, I personally don't think you need over 100 frames to run this game. The game still goes through some problems with unstable frame rate and some few stutters. The stutters I've experienced was during certain cutscenes. I have no idea why the game acted like that, but it was also very uncommon to see a stutter on the majority of the cutscenes I've seen so far. With gameplay, I didn't experience these stutters, but the unstable frame rate kind of threw me off a bit because when roaming around areas, sometimes the game is at 70 FPS, then can drop drastically to 40 FPS. By all means, this is definitely better than what the PS5 went through. You couldn't even pass 30 FPS when exploring, so having a higher frame rate when traversing through these areas is easy on the eyes. It's just that there will be inconsistency of smoothness when roaming around. This sort of applies while you are in combat, but it's not as noticeable since you are engaged in the gameplay. But this can be a bit of a problem for some that can notice these things on PC. What helped created my experience much smoother with the gameplay is turning on frame generation. Frame generation is only available to Nvidia's 40 series, and unfortunately for those who would own the game without having a 40 series GPU installed on their PC, they wouldn't be able to have a smoother experience if they are running their graphic settings high. Enabling frame generation helped me increase my performance by having a higher frame rate, so I wouldn't be able to drop at 40 frames. I had such a smoother experience, and seeing this game on its max settings is the most beautiful thing I've seen in gaming. I always thought the game already looked great on PS5, but having higher frame rate with more detailed graphic fidelity and maintaining the same resolution is such a blessing to experience for a game like Final Fantasy XVI. It just hurts me a little bit that not everyone can experience this game on higher settings with how the game is currently optimized for PC. They have been updating the game with patches starting from August, but I hope they continue to fix the performance of this game because it could be heavy for your GPU. I almost forgot to mention that the cutscenes were locked to 30 FPS even though it was in-game, and it could be a bit weird seeing your gameplay on high frame rate then immediately switch to a locked 30 FPS. I wanted to bring it up since this can potentially bother someone throughout the game as there are many cutscenes to go through. I didn't talk about this as much since they didn't really bother me, and hopefully there is a patch to fix that as well. I do want to note that this was a game made for console in mind, and which was built around dynamic resolution, which the PS5 was utilizing at the time of its release. So I do recommend people who do not have frame generation is that you should utilize the dynamic resolution setting if you don't mind how the visuals look on your current PC build to have a better optimized playthrough. Feel free to share your experience of how the game ran on your PC build, because I'm quite curious to how it ran on other GPUs that didn't have frame generation. Overall, I believe this is a solid game to experience for people who really want to sit back and see a deep storytelling game unfold with stylish combat that embraces different playstyles. When the game was first launched on the PS5, and knowing it was going to have gameplay that I always wanted to experience in Final Fantasy, this was a dream come true. So coming into this game and seeing how the gameplay performance with frame rate was, I was a little bummed out that the game couldn't be pushed further, or not having graphics options to have a better performance was unfortunate. Being able to experience this game on PC was mind-blowing to say the least, because I was so used to going through the PS5 build, and having the PC version looked even better when you were able to really max out the graphic fidelity and maintain resolution with the use of frame generation changed my perspective on this game. Although I said before that the game's performance on the PS5 didn't necessarily bug me at all, seeing this game once more with the issues I had before, which are kind of resolved with the PC version, really made me realize that there is a lot to see for not just someone like me who has experienced this game or is familiar with Final Fantasy, but for a newcomer who is not even familiar with the game at all will be surprised coming into this. I don't think this is the best optimized build for the game considering of the various problems it could have, but for an average user who just wants to play a big budget title, I would say this would be worth your time. I've completed this game multiple times and I have experienced the DLC expansion, which I recommend for you to buy if you're enjoying the base game a lot. The maps on the DLC expansion are visually stunning. I am not exaggerating when I say that, and Square Enix has always been on top of their visuals throughout their existence. You would not get disappointed when experiencing it. This wraps up for my FF16 video. Thank you again for those who have continued to support the channel. If you enjoy a variety of game reviews, feel free to subscribe right now, and remember to drop a like while you're at it. Any support to the video and channel is very much appreciated. Thank you again if you watch up until this point. Until next time, I hope to see you on the next video, and have a good day. And maybe you're probably playing Final Fantasy 16. I hope you're enjoying that too. Alright, peace off.